My name is Lorene, and for most of my life, I believed that being the quiet one, the one who didn't cause trouble, who smoothed things over, meant I was doing the right thing. I thought love meant giving without asking much in return. But over time, something in me began to ache in places I couldn't ignore anymore. And one day, a single sentence, spoken so casually, broke everything wide open. Keep listening to hear how that moment changed everything for me. And when it's over, tell me in the comments, did I do the right thing? Would you have done the same? I really want to know. It was during one of those damp Portland evenings, when the rain feels more like silence than water, that I realized something in me had quietly cracked. I was sitting by the fogged-up window of Cedar and Pine Cafe, tracing a faint circle into the condensation on the glass. The soft hum of Norah Jones played in the background, mixing with the quiet clinks of silverware and the hiss of espresso machines. I had picked our usual table, the one near the back wall, next to the plant that never seemed to grow. My parents were running late, as usual. The framed flyer for Bloomview Elementary's student art showcase lay folded neatly beside my mug. I had been meaning to bring it up gently, maybe even show them the sketch Emma made last week, the one with the tall trees and crooked stars. Her teacher said it would be displayed front and center. It was a big deal to her, and to me. They arrived 10 minutes late. My father was already checking his phone as he sat down. My mother adjusted her scarf like she was brushing off something unpleasant. She gave me a brief smile, more of a nod, really, and then asked about work, as if reading off a script she hadn't rehearsed. I answered politely, then gently pivoted the topic. I told them about Emma's art being selected, how proud she was, how she'd spent a week working on the piece. My voice must have carried some hope in it. Hope they'd finally hear the excitement and meet it halfway. My mother took a slow sip of her decaf. Then she tilted her head, looked over the rim of her cup, and said, "Why are your kids always so quiet? It's like they're not fully there. Something feels off." I didn't respond. Not at first, because if I had spoken right then, I'm not sure what would have come out. Words or salt water. I just nodded. Let the moment pass. Let her move on to some new topic, like weather or traffic, or her new electric blanket. But her words had already sunk deep, somewhere between my ribs, where guilt and fatigue like to settle. She said it like she was stating a fact, not intending to wound, not even thinking it would sting. Just a casual observation. But it stayed with me, like a stain. Because it wasn't the first time. There had always been comments, subtle, sharp, but never that blunt. Never in public. Never like a stamp on my children's foreheads. And as much as I wanted to believe it was ignorance or habit, something told me it wasn't. Something told me she meant exactly what she said, and had for a long time. My father didn't even look up from his phone, just muttered something about how kids these days are always in their heads anyway. I sat through the rest of the dinner, barely tasting my food. My mother asked about work again, about whether I was still doing that same project. I nodded. I didn't offer more. She didn't ask about Emma again. The sketch I had, meant to give them, Emma's second draft for the showcase, stayed in my bag. I had printed it on thick paper, bought a frame even, but as I zipped up my coat and stepped back into the drizzle, I left it untouched, folded between napkins and receipts. It stayed there for weeks, creased, forgotten, just like the part of me that used to care so much about being their daughter. And as I walked back to my car, umbrella tucked beneath my arm, rain patting lightly on my hood, I heard her words again in my head. Something feels off. And I remember thinking, if my kids aren't enough for them, then who have I been trying to please all these years? I sat in the car for a long while before turning the key, not crying, just quiet. Like my children. Quiet like Emma when she draws. Quiet like Evan when he plays piano before bed, whispering to the keys like they understand him. I've always thought there was something holy in their silence, something soft the world didn't deserve. But that night, I wondered if maybe, just maybe, I'd been wrong all this time. Not about them, but about who was allowed to call themselves family. After that dinner, something shifted. Not just between me and my parents, but inside me. Like I'd opened a drawer that had been jammed for years, and now couldn't close it again. I started noticing everything with sharper edges. The way my mother always bragged about Ryan, my nephew, like he was the sole heir to the family name. He kicked a soccer ball once at age 3, and she declared he had natural athleticism. She still tells that story at barbecues. Emma learned to read music at 5. She played Beethoven by 8. Not a word. And when Evan built a miniature roller coaster from scratch, using a cardboard box and toothpicks, my dad just said, "You know, real boys climb trees." I had spent years trying not to let it get to me, telling myself they were old-fashioned, that they didn't know better, that maybe I just needed to try harder, call more often, send more photos, explain things in simpler terms. I even started a group text with them last year called Grandparent Updates. I'd send little videos, Emma painting by the window, Evan humming while he tinkered with a keyboard. Most of the time, I got a heart reaction or a one-word reply. But when Ryan won 3rd place at his school's spelling bee, they posted it to Facebook with a caption that read, "So proud of our grandson." No mention of Emma's regional art prize. No post about Evan's school solo. I guess I'd always thought maybe one day they'd see it, that if I just kept showing up, kept performing the role of the dutiful daughter, they'd finally notice the kids the way I did. As full people. As magic. I brought all of this up with Maylene one afternoon while we were stocking mugs behind the counter at the cafe. The place was quiet between lunch and the early dinner crowd, and we had about 10 minutes before her kids' therapy session let out. Maylene listened the way she always did. Shoulders relaxed, sleeves rolled, hands still moving, but her attention fully with you. When I told her what my mother said, "Something feels off," she stopped mid-wipe and leaned back against the counter. "They're not confused," she said quietly. "They just don't care to understand. And you're still giving them the front row seats to your life." I looked at her, unsure what to say. She wiped her hands on a towel and added, "You're letting people judge your children from the VIP section when they haven't even earned general admission." Her words hit me harder than I expected. Maybe because she knew. Maylene's ex-husband's family used to call her son difficult. She stopped visiting after one Christmas, where his meltdown over loud music got her labeled as a soft mother. She never went back. That evening, after the kids went to bed, I checked my email. There it was. Subject line, "Travel plans." I opened it. "We're flying to Austin next Thursday. Ryan has his big Christmas play at church. He's playing a shepherd. Should be adorable. Thought you'd want to know." No mention of the art show I had invited them to just 3 days earlier. The one I told them about over dinner. The one that was happening 5 minutes from their house. I stared at the screen for a long time. I reread it. And then I read it again. They were willing to fly across the country to see a child hold a wooden staff for 5 minutes on stage, but couldn't spare an hour to see Emma's paintings. Couldn't rearrange a shopping day to walk through a school gym and smile at their granddaughter, standing proudly next to her work. I didn't cry. Not immediately. I felt hollow, not angry, not even surprised. Just quietly done. I closed the laptop, sat back in the chair. The heater kicked on in the corner of the room, humming like it always did around 9 p.m. I looked around our little apartment, at the kids' art taped to the fridge, at the blanket Evan always left half folded on the couch, at the books stacked unevenly by the door. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. I'd spent so long trying to keep people in our lives just because we shared blood, but maybe that was never enough. Maybe that had never actually meant family. I didn't call them right away. I let that email sit for 2 days while I went through the motions, packing school lunches, reviewing homework, folding laundry that never seemed to end. But the silence between us got louder with every passing hour, like a leak dripping under the floorboards I couldn't ignore anymore. On the 3rd evening, after the kids went to bed, I dialed my mother's number. She picked up on the second ring. Hi, sweetheart, she said, like nothing had happened. Like she hadn't just made it perfectly clear where her attention and affection was going. I didn't bother with small talk. Mom, I said, steady, but with that tight feeling in my throat. Can I ask you something? Of course. Why are you and Dad flying to Austin next week, but you couldn't come see Emma's art show? It's 15 minutes away. There was a pause. Not long, but enough to know she wasn't surprised by the question. We already had that weekend booked, she replied. You know how hard it is to change flights and schedules. And Ryan's play, well, he's on stage in front of hundreds of people. It's a big deal. So is Emma's painting, I said. She worked on it for weeks. Her school chose it to represent the entire fourth grade. That means something. My voice wasn't loud, but it carried. I could hear the firmness in it, even as I tried to keep things calm. Mom sighed. Lorene, you always do this. You make it a competition. Ryan's show just has more going on. I mean, a painting? Every kid draws. I went quiet. Not because I had nothing to say, but because that sentence had just carved through me. Like she'd held a mirror up to every moment I had tried to believe my children were enough for them. And now I saw it. Clear as day. They weren't. And maybe, just maybe, they never had been. I'm not making it a competition, I said slowly. I just wanted you to show up, to her, for once. Well, we can't be everywhere, she said, then added, like it was an afterthought, tell her good luck from us. I ended the call soon after, polite but distant. She didn't notice the change in my tone. Or maybe she did, but chose to ignore it, like she always had. That night, Emma came into the kitchen while I was wiping down the counter. She was holding a piece of paper, her eyes searching mine. Did Grandma say she's coming to my art show? I froze, just for a second, but it was enough. She caught the hesitation and looked down. It's okay, she mumbled. I was just wondering. I wanted to lie. I really did. I wanted to tell her that Grandma was busy, but would come another time, that something came up, that maybe there was still hope. But the truth sat too heavy. So I crouched beside her, tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, and said, No, baby, she's not coming. Emma didn't cry. She just nodded, then asked the one question that finally broke me. Maybe my art is boring? I reached out, pulled her into my arms, held her so tightly I felt her heartbeat against mine. Your art is beautiful, I whispered. It's honest and wild and brave. And if someone can't see that, that's about them, not you. I stayed up late that night, remembering a card I made when I was 6. A Mother's Day drawing. Crayons, hearts, stick figures of me and her holding hands. I had slipped it into her briefcase, hoping she'd find it during work and smile. She never mentioned it. Months later, I found it still in the briefcase, folded into quarters, stuck between 2 client folders like a piece of scrap paper. Back then, I told myself she was just busy, that maybe she forgot, that she'd meant to say something. But now, watching my daughter question her worth over a missing seat in the audience, I knew better. This wasn't forgetfulness. It was a pattern of absence dressed up as busyness, of conditional love wearing the mask of practicality, of showing up only when it made them feel important. And I was done pretending that was okay. A few days after the art show, I walked into the cafe feeling like I'd been carrying someone else's weight on my back, the kind of invisible heaviness that made even the sound of a coffee grinder feel too loud. I nodded at Maylin as I slipped behind the counter, hoping she wouldn't ask anything. But of course, she noticed. You're moving like you're underwater, she said, handing me a rag. I feel like it, I muttered. We stocked mugs and wiped down tables in silence for a bit. The lunch rush had ended, and there were only a couple of customers left, an old man reading a newspaper and a college kid typing too loudly. The hum of espresso machines felt far away. I moved slower than usual, my thoughts spinning through everything that had happened. Emma's question, my mom's voice, the way my father always stayed quiet, like silence excused him. You want to talk, Malin finally said, or do you want to avoid yourself for a little longer? I looked up, gave her a half smile. How about both? She nodded and reached into her tote bag, pulling out a folded piece of notebook paper. This is from Nico. Wrote it after therapy last week. I wasn't going to show it to anyone, but maybe you're supposed to see it. I took the note, curious. It was written in crayon, each letter uneven but deliberate. There was a little stick figure drawing at the bottom. 3 people, one taller figure in the middle, holding 2 hands. Thank you for being my mom, it read. You always listen, even when I'm not easy to understand. I feel safe because you see me. That was it. Nothing fancy, no big words, but I had to blink several times before the letters stopped swimming. I folded it back up, pressing my hand to my chest like it could keep something from breaking open. Emma's never said anything like that, I said quietly. Doesn't mean she's not thinking it, Malin replied. I nodded, staring at the counter like it held the answers. Because in that moment, I saw it differently. Not just the judgment, but the silence around it. My job wasn't to chase their approval anymore. It was to be a buffer between my children and the people who made them feel small. That evening, I muted the family group chat. No more updates. No more pictures of Evan's piano recitals or Emma's drawings. For years, I'd been feeding them little windows into our lives, hoping they'd look through and care. But they never did. Not really. Then came December. A voicemail from my mom popped up while I was packing lunches. Hey, sweetie, she said too brightly. Just checking in. We're doing Christmas at your brother's this year. Ham, carols, the works, matching pajamas for the grandkids. Don't forget the usual before the 15th. Your dad wants a new space heater. It wasn't even a question, just an expectation baked into every word. I didn't respond right away. Instead, I opened my banking app, stared at the $700 recurring transfer I'd been sending for the last 4 years. $700 a month for people who couldn't drive 15 minutes to see my daughter's art. I canceled it. Then, I called the local art shop near Emma's school. Her teacher had mentioned they offered archival storage for student work. Safe, climate-controlled, professional. I asked if they had room for a few large portfolios. Absolutely, the woman said. How long are you thinking? I thought about that for a moment. Let's say a year. I paid the full fee up front. It wasn't cheap, but it felt like the first dollar I'd spent in a long time that didn't come with strings. Emma helped me organize the work. She was so careful, sliding each piece into its sleeve like it was treasure. We added labels, dates, little notes. Evan played soft piano while we worked, the notes drifting through the apartment like light rain. No one mentioned Christmas. No one mentioned grandparents. And no one seemed to miss them. The next morning, I saw a new drawing taped to the fridge. It was a treehouse floating in the sky, with ropes and ladders stretching out in every direction. There were little figures climbing up, and one sitting inside, reading a book. On the side, she'd written, "Home is where someone sees you." I stood there longer than I needed to. My coffee got cold on the counter. I didn't care, because I realized I wasn't just raising children. I was unlearning everything I'd been taught about what family owed you, and what you owed yourself. I didn't realize how many backup plans I had been keeping alive until the moment I started letting them die, one by one. Quietly, like turning off lights in an empty house. The family group chat stayed muted. No updates, no new photos. Just a long scroll of unread messages from months ago, mostly from me, ending in silence. The holiday card from my parents still sat unopened on the kitchen counter, buried beneath grocery receipts and a permission slip I forgot to sign. Evan had used it as a coaster. I left it there. Let the coffee ring soak into the glossy paper, blurring Ryan's smiling face in his shepherd's costume. 3 weeks into January, the final crack came. Not loud or dramatic, but small and unmistakable. The kind of break you don't hear until something falls apart in your hands. My phone buzzed while I was folding laundry. At first, I thought it was a reminder or a promo, but then I saw the name, Mom. The first text, "Hope you're well." Then another, "Haven't heard from you in a while." Then, "Your father's worried." That made me pause. I almost laughed. Since when did worry motivate them? Then came the long one. "I don't understand why you're punishing us. You've always been so sensitive. You know how busy we are. You chose to isolate the kids, not us, and we don't know what we did wrong." That sentence, "We don't know what we did wrong," it hit harder than any shouting match ever could. Because that's the trick, isn't it? If they never acknowledge the wound, then maybe they're not responsible for it. If they act confused, you're the one making things difficult. You're dramatic. You're the one holding grudges. You're the one who chose distance. I didn't respond. I just stood there with my phone in one hand and a half-folded towel in the other. Heart racing, eyes stinging, but dry. I clenched the phone so tight the case groaned under the pressure of my grip. Then I grabbed my keys and left. I drove to work early, even though I wasn't on the schedule. I just needed somewhere to sit that wasn't my living room. The cafe was dim, filled only with the scent of yesterday's espresso and the hum of the fridge behind the counter. I sat in the corner booth near the window, the same one I always used to wait for them in. Outside, the rain made lazy streaks down the glass. I stared out at the blur of gray sky and headlights, trying to remember the last time I felt like I had a mother I could call when things were hard. I don't think I ever did. That night, after the kids were tucked in, Emma under a blanket with a new graphic novel, Evan already asleep with headphones barely hanging on, I sat in the living room with my laptop, a mug of peppermint tea long gone cold, and a spreadsheet. Savings, rent, groceries, school fees, just numbers. But they told the whole story of how close we always lived to the edge, how many things I quietly went without. My own haircuts, new shoes, that online painting class I used to daydream about but never dared to register for. Then my eyes landed on one line, bolded out of habit, family support, $700 every single month. For 4 years. $700. That was a semester of piano lessons for Evan, a full summer of art camp for Emma, a deposit on a better apartment. And in return, I got silence. Guilt-laced messages, Christmas cards with my kids' names spelled wrong, half-hearted calls on speakerphone, full of noise but empty of care. Blame when I began to pull back, a growing, aching emptiness where love was supposed to live. I stared at the number. Then I opened a new tab. I had bookmarked job postings in Asheville. I wasn't sure when the idea first started. Maybe after Malin showed me photos of her cousin's backyard in the Blue Ridge Mountains, or maybe after I watched Emma draw that treehouse with no fence. Either way, the idea of a fresh start had stopped being a fantasy. It was a plan. I found a rental, 2 bedrooms, a backyard, a kitchen window with a seat that caught the morning sun. It was small, but something in me said yes. I could see Emma painting there, Evan composing under the trees. I could see me, finally breathing like I meant it. I messaged the landlord. The next day, I started packing, not just belongings, but old hopes, too. Versions of myself I had clung to out of fear. The daughter who waited to be chosen. The woman who smiled politely while being erased. I folded them into boxes and sealed them shut. Malin came by that weekend. She brought tape and takeout and played jazz while we worked. "You sure?" she asked, sitting cross-legged in the middle of the kitchen, surrounded by bubble wrap and Sharpie pens. For the first time, I said, "Yeah." She looked at me, really looked, and said, "Then you're not running away. You're choosing peace." I didn't respond. I just smiled. Not because it felt good, but because it felt true. 2 weeks later, I turned in the apartment keys. I didn't cry. I left a thank you note for the landlord. We drove out of Portland at sunrise, the kids asleep in the back seat, the trunk full of everything we owned and nothing that we didn't. I didn't tell my parents we were leaving. I didn't owe them that. And somewhere between one state line and the next, As the mountains rose up to meet the horizon and the road stretched wide ahead, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. I didn't tell anyone. Not Malin, not the kids' teachers, not even my supervisor at the cafe until I handed in my keys. When I made the decision to leave, I kept it quiet like it was something sacred. Like speaking it out loud might jinx the courage it took to finally do it. I cashed out my savings, what little there was, and paid first, last, and deposit on a small rental in Asheville. It wasn't fancy, but it had everything I needed: 2 bedrooms, a tiny fenced yard, and a sunlit corner in the kitchen where Emma could paint in the mornings. The street was lined with maples, and the neighbors nodded instead of prying. I packed our life into boxes in 4 days. The kids didn't ask many questions, just helped me tape up cardboard and label their bins. I think they sensed something was different this time, something final. I got a new phone number, created a new email, filled out enrollment forms for a new school, and listed no emergency contacts but myself. For the first time in my life, every single detail on those papers reflected only me and the children. No one else's address, no fallback names, no illusions of support. I didn't tell my parents I was leaving Portland. I didn't leave a note or update my address. I figured if they ever wanted to know where I was, they had enough imagination to figure it out. Or they didn't. Either way, I was done handing them access. 2 days after the move, I got a phone call from a number I didn't recognize. I didn't pick up. A minute later, a text came through. "You can't just disappear like this. Don't be selfish, like your father was." That was all it said. But that was enough. That sentence had lived in my bones since I was 8 years old. My father had walked out after years of resentment, and my mother never let me forget it. Anytime something went wrong, she'd say, "You're just like him," as if I'd inherited his exit, as if leaving when something became unbearable was some kind of sin coded in my DNA. I sat with the message for a long time. My thumb hovered over the reply button, but I didn't press it. Instead, I opened the banking app and checked my account. I canceled the remaining automatic payment on the credit card my mother had been using as a backup, which I'd co-signed out of guilt 7 years ago. Then I called my insurance provider and removed her name from my life insurance policy. She'd never contributed to it, never even asked about it. But her name had been sitting there, quietly, like a placeholder for a daughter trying too hard to be good. I went through the kids' school files and deleted the emergency contact listing with their names and address. I replaced it with a note. Single guardian. No secondary family contact available. It felt clean. I thought I might cry doing it. I didn't. It didn't even feel dramatic. It felt like sweeping out a room no one had entered in years. Just dust, cobwebs, and a strange sense of space opening up where heaviness used to be. That night, I made spaghetti with the kids. We didn't talk about the move or the changes. We talked about Evan's music teacher, who wore Christmas socks in February, and Emma's new art teacher, who let the kids paint with sponges and toothbrushes. After they went to bed, I sat on the back steps and let the cold air sting my face. The stars were brighter here. No city haze, just dark sky and clarity. I pulled out my phone and reread that message one more time. Don't be selfish like your father was. And I saw it differently, not as an accusation, not even as guilt, but as freedom. Because if refusing to carry someone else's brokenness made me like him, then maybe he had been trying to survive something too. Maybe leaving wasn't always about abandonment. Sometimes it's about choosing life before it drains out of you completely. The knock came on a Thursday. It was late afternoon, the sky bruised and heavy with winter clouds. I was in the kitchen slicing apples for a crumble Emma and I were making when I heard it. 3 soft raps, like whoever stood there wasn't sure they should be knocking at all. I wiped my hands, walked to the door, and opened it without checking the peephole. There they were, my parents. My mother was holding a paper bag. Apple pie, I guessed. Her coat looked expensive, like it had never been worn in the rain. My father stood beside her, his hands deep in his pockets, eyes darting from the doormat to the tree behind me and back again. Neither of them looked older exactly, just smaller. We stood like that for a few seconds, none of us saying anything. The kind of silence that doesn't beg to be broken. The kind that says, "This moment has been waiting for us." Then my mother spoke. "Do the kids still remember us?" Her voice was light, casual, like it could be a question about weather or school schedules. I looked at her and didn't flinch. "No," I said, "and neither does my bank account." It came out even, not cruel, not loud. Just, done. Her lips parted, as if to say something, but nothing followed. She looked past me into the house, as if expecting to see a flash of a child, a toy on the floor, a memory she could claim as hers. But there was nothing there for her. My father still hadn't spoken. His shoulders shifted slightly, but his mouth stayed shut. He looked tired, not in a sick way, more like someone who finally realized he'd slept through something important. I didn't invite them in. They didn't ask. We just stood there, three people connected by blood and decades of unsaid things. And for once, I didn't feel the need to fill the silence. Eventually, my mother placed the pie on the step. "Well," she said, adjusting her scarf, "we were just in the area." I almost laughed. Asheville was 5 states away from where they lived. There was no chance they were just in the area. But I didn't challenge it. What would be the point? They turned and walked down the steps, slow and quiet. Not defeated, not apologetic, just unsure, like they were walking away from something they still didn't fully understand. I watched them reach the car, a silver sedan I didn't recognize, probably rented. Then I closed the door. Not a slam, not dramatic, just a quiet click. The house was warm inside, filled with the scent of cinnamon and baked apples. I walked back toward the kitchen, past the hallway, lined with drawings and piano certificates. Emma had taped a new picture to the wall just that morning. I stopped in front of it and looked closely. It was a little house on a hill, surrounded by trees and stars. 3 figures stood in front, one taller, two smaller. One held a paintbrush, one held a stuffed fox, the last held a tiny keyboard. Above them, in careful block letters, she'd written, "Home means we stay." I touched the edge of the paper, running my fingers along the crayon marks. Behind me, I heard Evan playing a few notes on his keyboard. Nothing fancy, just little bursts of sound, like birds waking up in the morning. I didn't cry. I didn't feel triumphant. What I felt was steadiness, like my feet had finally learned the shape of solid ground. I went back to the kitchen, stirred the crumble, and turned the oven off. The kids came in laughing, arguing about who got to scoop the ice cream. I handed them each a bowl, told them to take it slow so they didn't burn their tongues. I didn't mention the visit. I didn't need to. We were already whole. I didn't tell the kids about the visit. Not that I was hiding it. It just didn't feel necessary. Some moments belong to silence more than they do to explanation. I spent the evening the same way I had before they showed up, cleaning, folding laundry, simmering soup. Except this time, there was something lighter in the air. Not joy, not relief, just space. Later that weekend, I took down the last framed photo on the shelf. It was one from years ago. Me, my parents, and my brother, standing stiffly in front of my childhood home. We weren't smiling, we were performing. I replaced it with a picture from Emma's recent art showcase. She was standing between Evan and me, cheeks flushed with pride, paint smudged on her fingers. No one was dressed perfectly. The lighting was bad, but we looked like we belonged to each other. I tucked the old photo into a shoebox, along with a few other things I wasn't ready to throw away, but no longer needed in view. Then I went to my laptop, opened my inbox, and created a new folder. I named it Unopened. One by one, I dragged every message from my parents into it. The check-ins, the guilt trips, the half-apologies disguised as confusion. I didn't delete them. I just filed them away, where I couldn't see them unless I chose to. That felt like enough. I don't feel guilty anymore for setting boundaries. I don't feel mean. I feel steady. I feel like a grown woman who finally learned to raise herself right alongside her kids. There are no more surprise drop ins, no more group chats with one word replies, no more checks sent out of habit. I spend that money now on tutoring, on a weekend art class for Emma, and a better keyboard for Evan. Every time I swipe my card for something that matters to us, I think, this is what love looks like when it's not trying to prove anything. A week after the visit, I got a letter forwarded from my old address. My hands shook a little when I saw my dad's handwriting on the envelope. It had been years since he'd written me anything. Inside was a single sheet of lined paper. "I never thought you'd really do it," it said. "But now that you have, I see things more clearly. Maybe you were always the brave one. Your mother won't say it, but I think part of her knew you'd leave. We just didn't believe you'd stay gone. Looking back, maybe you were right." There was no return address, no request for a call, just that. And in a way, it was more than I ever expected. That evening, Emma brought home another painting. This one was of a house on a hill with big windows and long curtains blowing in the wind. There was a garden in the front, and instead of a fence, there were flowers, rows and rows of wild color. No walls, just openness. I asked her what it was. She shrugged. "Just where I feel safe." At parent-teacher night, her new art teacher leaned toward me and whispered, "Your daughter has such emotional range. She paints like someone who's been truly seen." On the walk home, Emma slipped her hand into mine and said, "You know, you're the first person who really saw me. I see you too now." That line stayed with me. Not just because it was sweet, but because it was honest. Kids don't lie about things like that. Not when it comes to feeling safe. That night, I sat by the window and watched the trees shift in the wind. The house was quiet except for Evan humming to himself as he sorted sheet music. The light from the kitchen bounced off the painting still drying on the table. Some people build homes out of bricks. I rebuilt mine out of silence, peace, and paint stains on my daughter's sleeves. Maybe you've been there too, caught between the need to be loyal and the need to be whole. Maybe you've stayed quiet longer than you should have, thinking it was the kinder thing to do. But here's what I've learned. Distance isn't always a punishment. Sometimes it's protection. Sometimes it's the first real act of love you give to yourself. If this story stirred something in you, I hope you'll carry it gently. Maybe even share your own story below. I'll be reading. And if you felt seen here, even just a little, I'd be honored to have you join me again next time. There's more to tell,